When you think about starting a podcast, the first thing that often comes to mind is the content. What are you going to talk about? Who will your guests be? But before you even dive into those exciting details, there's something more fundamental that you need to nail down: your podcast name and description. These elements are your first impression, the bait that hooks potential listeners, and they can make or break your show before it even begins. So let's break down what it takes to create a memorable podcast name and a compelling description that resonates with your audience. First off, let's talk about choosing a podcast name. This might seem straightforward, but it's an art form in itself. Your podcast name should be unique, relevant, and easy to remember. Think about it. You want something that captures the essence of your content while sparking curiosity. A name like Science V's instantly tells you that you're about to dive into scientific debates. It's clear, it's concise, and it sets the tone right away. Clarity is key. You want your listeners to know what they're getting into without having to decipher a riddle. Now, let's discuss brevity. Shorter names are not only easier to remember, but also easier to recognize. Take lore, for example. It's a single word, but it packs a punch. It's memorable and impactful, and it instantly suggests a focus on storytelling. You don't want your name to be a mouthful. If it's too long or complicated, it risks being forgotten or misremembered, which is the last thing you want when you're trying to build an audience. Uniqueness is another critical aspect. In a crowded podcast landscape, standing out is essential. You want to avoid generic names like The Podcast Show. Instead, think of something that captures your podcast's vibe. Armchair Expert is a perfect example. It suggests casual yet insightful discussions, which is exactly what listeners can expect. It's quirky, it's memorable, and it gives a hint of what's to come. Searchability is also crucial. You want a name that's easy to spell and search for online. Avoid overly creative spellings that could confuse potential listeners. For instance, if you're thinking of a name like Finance Talks, you might want to reconsider. It sounds clever, but it's likely to lead to a lot of frustrated searches. Stick to something straightforward that people can easily type into a search bar. Now that we've covered the name, let's move on to crafting a compelling podcast description. This is your chance to summarize your podcast's content and appeal directly to your target audience. Think of it as your elevator pitch. You want to start with a hook, something that captures attention right away. For example, ever wondered about the science behind everyday myths? Join us as we separate fact from fiction. That opening line not only piques interest, but also sets the stage for what's to come. Next, you need to explain your podcast's value. What can listeners expect? Are you providing unique insights, entertainment, or practical tips? For instance, you might say, each week we bring you expert interviews and captivating stories to help you live sustainably. This gives potential listeners a clear idea of what they'll gain by tuning in. You want them to feel excited about the value you're offering. Don't forget to mention the format. Briefly outline what listeners can expect in terms of style and episode structure. Are you doing interviews, solo episodes, or listener Q&A sessions? For example, episodes feature candid interviews, solo deep dives, and listener Q&A sessions. This transparency helps set expectations and can attract listeners who are looking for that specific format. And here's a little insider tip. Use keywords for SEO. Including relevant words related to your niche can help your podcast appear in search results. If you're running a personal finance podcast, words like budgeting, investing, and money management should definitely make an appearance in your description. This not only helps with discoverability, but also ensures that your podcast reaches the right audience. Now, let's talk about aligning your name and description with your target audience. It's essential that both resonate with their interests and preferences. If your podcast is aimed at teenagers, a playful name like Teen Talk Central might be perfect, coupled with a description that emphasizes relatable advice and trending topics. You want your audience to feel like you're speaking directly to them, that you understand their world. Once you've brainstormed potential names and descriptions, don't just keep them to yourself. Share them with friends, family, or online communities for feedback. Sometimes, a fresh set of eyes can provide invaluable insights. You can also use tools like Google Trends to check the popularity of certain keywords in your name. This research can save you from potential pitfalls and help you refine your choices. Let's take a moment to look at some examples of great podcast names and descriptions. How I Built This gives you a clear idea of what to expect. Stories behind well-known companies from the people who created them. The Happiness Lab invites listeners to explore the science of happiness with Dr. Laurie Santos. Crime Junkie speaks directly to true crime enthusiasts, while Grammar Girl promises quick tips for better writing. Each of these examples showcases clarity, relevance, and appeal. In conclusion, remember that a memorable podcast name is clear, unique, brief, and relevant to your content. A compelling description hooks listeners, outlines the value of your podcast, and highlights its format. Aligning your name and description with your target audience ensures that you resonate with them on a deeper level. And don't forget to test your name and description through feedback and research to refine their effectiveness. With these strategies in your toolkit, you'll be well on your way to attracting an engaged audience eager to tune in to what you have to say.